Unless you are a student of physics, most of us would think that when water travels through a tube, it exerts a greater pressure when it's traveling at higher speeds. Now, that's only true when water exits out of the tube, and where it hits its target, that's where the high pressure is. So what we see over here is always what we think is happening on the inside, but that's not true. So for the benefit of those of us who have forgotten our high school physics, this is how we can visualize it. Let's get a bunch of preschool kids, place them in a long hallway, for example, in a school, and we tell these kids, okay, hey, I want you to get to the end of the hallway, but walk. Take your time with it. So we know how inquisitive kids can get. So as they're walking, they're going to start looking around, they're going to touch the walls, furniture, surfaces. If there's a door with a window, they're going to look inside and wave hi to their friends in the other classrooms. Anywhere they can reach, that's where we'll find their fingerprints. Now, let's take these same kids in the same hallway, but this time we tell them, kids, I want you to run as fast as you can to the other end of the hall. So while they're running, they do not have the same time and opportunity to touch the same surfaces that they did before. So let's take this analogy and compare it with water traveling through a tube. Remember that pressure is exerted when the water particles collide with the walls of the surfaces. So if we look at these kids, alright, wherever they have their fingerprints, that's where they're touching the walls. That's the same as where the water particles are colliding with the walls. So the greater the speed which water travels through the tube, the less fingerprints, therefore the lower pressure. This behavior is found in all fluids, i.e. liquids and gases. Of course, this was discovered by Daniel Bernoulli, and this became the basis of Bernoulli's principle, which states that for a dynamic fluid, the greater its speed, the lower its pressure. Sorry, that's it. Thank you.
Thank you, Zian. Zian, take it away.
But I don't know the more science of these judges, so they only
See the head, check them.
Okay. Assuming, I'm going to use your analogy back to you. That's assuming if the hallway is very straight and it doesn't have a slight curve or even a sharp curve. So that principle changes immediately depending on the, on how the whole environment is. So I'm going to ask you this. If assuming that every single water pipe we have in the country, they are straight, then why is it that we are having water issues in our country of non-revenue water, meaning water that escapes in between the dams to our houses and offices, the water leaks away? Does the material of the pipes also influence your analogy? Because even though it might not be pressure, but there might be other scientific interaction between the fluid inside the pipe and the material of the pipe itself.
Yes, excellent question. Yes, because if I recall from, I'm sorry, because I will be honest, my physics right now is very high school. But yes, I remember eons ago when I learned engineering, we did learn about the different coefficients that influence Bernoulli's equations. So you are very correct, sir. In terms of the materials. So my analogy probably wouldn't be best because it's a very simplistic analogy. But I think when it comes to analogy, we can't always assume to have one analogy in a one-size-fits-all situation. So the reason I came up with this analogy was more for my high school students because a lot of them keep arguing with me saying that no, teacher, the greater its speed, the greater its pressure has to be. So when I come up with analogies like this in my class, I agree they are very only for this situation, they're not one size fits all, but I always come up with analogies to help them understand within that situation how true that particular principle is. So if we were to look at coefficients of different materials, then yes, I agree, the analogy may not work, but we would have to come up with a different analogy for the understanding, because analogies doesn't mean it's true. This is not the truth. children are not water particles, but we can compare our understanding of how pressure works with this analogy. It is for them to understand, oh, this is the why. So I believe with that understanding, then later once they understand that, they can progress to higher levels of logical thinking and other analogies.
I agree with you. That's why I say it like that, because I want your student to be able to solve our water issue. Because it's been 2 generations, and both the scientific, the engineering, and the industry, they have failed to address our water issue, because if they study Bernoulli, they only use Bernoulli. They don't use 360 degrees. Thank you so much. Over to the more cruel judges, the other 2.
Dr. Liz, over to you.
Thank you. Teacher Zian, if I had had you as my physics teacher, I might not have failed physics.
Oh no!
So many congratulations to you for your wonderful presentation. But I'm going to be a little blunt and ask a question that I wish I had been able to ask my physics and science teacher, my science and maths teachers. And the reason why I'm asking you this is because the audience for this competition is a general audience, it's not high school students. So the question is, how does as an ordinary person, not just knowing but understanding Bernoulli's principle change my life? Why should I care, I suppose, other than being in school and needing to learn about this principle in order to pass a physics test?
That's a fair question, but I think also that this applies for a lot of scientific concepts that we learn in school. But I would say that Bernoulli's principle on its own, probably on its own we can't say that there's use, because it is present in every application we have. Like spray bottles, for example, how airplanes take off, but understandably you don't need to understand these concepts for you to know how to use these devices. But yeah, so I to be honest, I can't give an answer on Bernoulli's alone. But what I would normally tell my students is we have to also look at it overall, because Bernoulli's principle normally also works with other concepts of pressure. So what I would also normally encourage my students to think about is if we look at pressure, for example, how a siphon works. Agreeably, it's not Bernoulli's in itself, but there is some relationship in terms of how water pressure causes water to move from one point to another, from, let's say, a higher pressure point to a lower pressure point. And during that transfer, we could also see how Bernoulli's principle applies in terms of the changes in pressure when, let's say, water travels faster or slower.
Missy,
Yes.
it would be interesting if you had brought up this Bernoulli principle with respect to the bottles being used for sanitizers and so on, the different types of things pertaining to COVID. That would make the topic more interesting and attractive to most people, because when you're talking about water pipe, it's a little bit dull. You're not going to talk about aeroplane, you're not going to talk about helicopters and so on. So try to package it in that way. Thank you.
Thank you for the suggestion. That's excellent. I do that for my students' classes. I forgot to bring it here.
Can I just say, wonderful presentation skills. I agree with Jalil. If the content had been a little different, rather than thinking of this for your high school students, look at a more general approach. I think your presentation skills are amazing. And congratulations.
Thank you so much. Thank you for the suggestions. I will use that in my classrooms as well to make them more relevant outside of the classroom, which I do. But but those are excellent suggestions. Thank you so much.
Thank you.
Thank you, judges. Thank you so much.
Thank you, Xian. All right.